professor of art history at UT, and this is the phonograph I listen to every day. It's an EMG MKXB Oversized. It was manufactured about 1935 by toward the end of the acoustic phonograph era, 10 years after the invention of the microphone, by a small company located in London. EMG took its name from the initials of one of its founders, Edward M. Ginn, who was someone who kind of got excited about the possibilities of phonograph sound, high fidelity phonograph sound in the 1920s, and began this company. And one of the things that the EMG company was famous for was their use of a new technology, exponential horn technology. Essentially, they exploited the recent discovery of the mathematical formula for expanding the diameter of the horn at various points along its length in order to produce optimal sound reproduction. This was invented by a physicist, discovered by a physicist named Wilson. So these horns of this period are called exponential horns or Wilson horns. Edward M. Ginn and EMG sailed quite nicely along for several years, introducing larger and more high fidelity models until a certain point where Ginn kind of ran afoul of his board of directors. We don't know exactly what happened. There's a book about this in the book. It kind of glosses over the exact nature of the scandal, but there was some sort of financial scandal. Ginn got carried away with something or other, and he was asked to leave his own company. The company had his own initials. And so one of the things he signed when he left the company was an agreement saying that he would not start a rival company in the tiny niche of handmade, one-of-a-kind phonographs for the local British market. And that's what he immediately set out and did. And he went out and started the Expert Company. And his ads are full of, I think Jim has a picture over here.
Sounds like the story that was on PBS Mr.
Yes. So this is what Ginn started producing, the Expert. And his ads also, they don't trash the EMGs, but they said, notice that we've removed the superfluous bend from the horn. And we've made all these other improvements on all of these things. And notice that our horn has a larger diameter at the base, and so forth and so on. So he really tried to drive his former partners out of business. And at the end, though, it was EMG that survived the Second World War and kept on producing acoustic phonographs into the late 1940s, in part because the market that they were working for was, it was a very circumscribed market in a way. There were two companies in London that were working for fairly high-end patrons who wanted not only a great phonograph, but a phonograph that they would design themselves. Both of these companies specialized, and they made a great point about the fact that they made their machines one by one. You would say, I want 10B with the oversized horn, and I want the case to be flame mahogany, or I want it to be quarterstone oak with this black banding of ebony around the edge, and I want a matching stand for it with a drawer. And they'd make it entirely to your specifications one by one. So they weren't into mass production at all. It was all about handmade, bespoke manufacture, kind of the way that high-end automobiles back in the early days used to be. And so there aren't very many of these around. There are people in the UK, there's a pretty impassioned group of people who study EMG and expert phonographs, and they've done things like censuses of surviving instruments. It's believed that only 50 of the oversized were ever made. Many of those lost their original horns because the horns were made out of papier collé, paper mache, except with strips of paper that were glued together over a wire frame. And so many of these have fallen apart, these horns, and you can see where the paper was. It was usually the Times of London newspaper that they cut out from the day before. And so some of these have lost their horn. This one had lost its horn. But I have a horn on it now because of the enterprise and imagination of one very extraordinary man, Graham Rankin, who lives in the south of England in a barn that usually belonged to Jane Austen's brother, and where he restores EMG phonographs and old racing cars from about 1900. And
Old racing cars.
his dream was, about 20 years ago, was to have one of these horns, but since there are only a tiny, tiny handful still surviving in the world, and only a few dozen were ever made, he realized the chances of his ever finding an original one were very slim. But a friend of his, a friend of mine also who has one, let him borrow it and take precise measurements from it. So he spent huge amounts of money at a factory making the molds and other machinery to reproduce every part of the original horn. The fiberglass body, which it surrounds an aluminum neck. The aluminum neck looks like it ends here, but it actually goes right up to here. And then there's a bronze connector inside that holds everything in place, because bronze has great tensile strength. So he made 12 of those horns using fiberglass, which is something fairly logical, because the people who made these horns in the day were the same people who made carnival masks out of paper mache. And now they make carnival masks out of, those same people make them out of fiberglass. So this is probably what they would have been using if they'd stayed in business. They have sound boxes for the EMGs, and the experts are really heavy. An expert sound box weighs 8 ounces, believe it or not. So think of that as your tracking weight. Usually we think in terms of grams with modern phonographs, but 8 ounces. And one way that they managed not to destroy the records is there was this whole culture of high-end phonographs in the UK, and they were also really into using fiber needles. Fiber needles were really what these machines were designed for. Either triangular needles that were cut from sections of bamboo, and you'd play them once and then sharpen it by chopping off a new edge, or cactus needles, and that's what I prefer. These are some cactus needles that have a really neat story too. There's a record store, there used to be a record store in London that would make these and sell them to the people who were really into this stuff back in the 20s and 30s. And women would come and have part-time jobs at night after their regular jobs, and they'd make these needles. But then the market kind of fell apart. Fast forward about 50 years, they still have these bales and bales of these needles for the photograph industry, and someone finds them and says, I can make needles now. These are the needles of a Burmese cactus. They were picked in the 30s by slaves in Burma, and the cactus is now extinct. So this pile of needles that
I feel like Woody Allen.
these were made from is the only surviving pile of this extinct plant's needles. And there's a fellow in the UK who's it's about 80 years old now, and you send him a letter and he'll write you back, and you send him a wire transfer and say, I'd like 100 soft needles, 100 loud needles, and he'll go out, he'll take some of his stash, cut them in 3 parts, dip them in the red dye, and then go out in his yard with the bench grinder and sharpen each one for you.
I hope he has an apprentice.
I hope so too. It would be sad if this died out. What did they sharpen them with? Can I borrow one of those? Let's see. I will show you. They made a whole panoply of different sharpening devices for cactus needles back in the day, and they were all very cool and interesting. Thank you. This one is special to me. This is my favorite because it was made by a Japanese priest, a Buddhist priest.
Oh my God.
A priest who has a hobby making automatic dolls. And this is a tradition that goes back centuries in Japan. These mechanical dolls that come out very lifelike, and they walk across the room, and they'll offer you a bowl of tea, and you pick up the bowl, and then it knows that from that motion that it's to bow to you and turn around. So he makes these things, but there's a small club of high-end British phonograph collectors in the area of Tokyo, and one of them, his name is Dr. Yuichi Sato, had one of these made by this Buddhist priest, and he made a YouTube video about it very helpfully, and I saw that, and I said, I want to have one of these too, so I learned how to navigate Japanese eBay. and bought this one, which may be the only one outside of Japan. It is. So you insert the needle into this chuck, like so. Then there's a little lever here you push up, like that. that
Oh, and the little thing.
holds it firmly against the grinding stone.
Grinding
with that
stone. And
rubber.
what is that made of?
That is, it's some kind, it's some sort of like a typical grindstone that you would have on a bench grinder, carborundum or something like that. And then you give it 8 or 9 good turns. And you're good to go for another play. So these needles can
How many
serve
plays do you
for
get out of them?
50 or 60.
Really?
Mhm.
It doesn't wear them down that much?
No, not very much at all. I sharpen them after each play generally. And you can only use fiber needles, bamboo or cactus, with records that are in pretty good condition. Because as records get worn, the smooth outer crust of the shellac wears away, and more of the rotten stone and other kinds of abrasive stone is exposed. So the surface underneath this fine enamel layer of a record is rougher. And so if the record's all sort of old and gray, you can tell you have to play it with steel. So I mark all my records saying this can be played with a fiber needle, or this one can't be. But one of the advantages of fiber needles is that they're very kind to the records. They keep the records from deteriorating essentially ever. But also they reduce the surface noise quite considerably.
Do they affect the quality of the sound any?
Not to my ear, but we can do some comparisons and see if what you think we could try playing the same record with the fiber needle and with the steel needle. Steel needle will generally give you a sharper, more incisive, or maybe more brassy sound. But I don't feel I'm losing anything in sound with most records. You can't use fiber needles very much with late American records like the Columbias which have the adjusted recording curve, because they have so much dynamic in them that even a brand new record will just eats a fiber needle. So, but UK records are pretty much all UK 78s you can play with these. But,
Have you written a book?
no, there is a book called
Can we set this in?
the EMG story, which Jim has a copy of, I think.
We're good to go, though.
But we're going to try this with the steel needle because it's kind of rough. But this is one of Jim's favorite records, "Doing the Raccoon" by the Knickerbockers.
Raccoon! Raccoon! Rock! Rock! Rock!
Princeton,
Harvard!
Cornell.
Yale! Oh, yes, also jail.
If you go there, I'll be there soon.
Well, please don't wear that old raccoon.
Intermediate, make believe they're all collegiate soon. Do the raccoon. Raccoon coat, don't care who's wearing them. Hall boys will all be sharing them soon. To do the raccoon. Why, every day you'll have your downs and your ups. Every day those raccoon coats will have pups. Wow, wow, wow. Date a girl, then start to hurry her right downtown to some big furrier soon. To do the raccoon. Oh, they wear them down at Princeton, and they share them up at Yale. Oh, they eat in them at Harvard, and they sleep in them in jail. Alpha, beta, delta, theta. Oh, what's the matter with alma mater? Foola, foola, why you're a foola. Oh, go to schooler and learn the raccoon. From every college campus comes a cheer.
Rock! Rock! Rock!
Season for the raccoon coats is here. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Breathing it here, I guess I'll put the old raccoon away.
The horns, like all horns, is very directional. So you who are in the line of fire are hearing more sound than people who are not directly on axis. So if you want to come around and stand in front, you'll hear things didn't know before. Jim very kindly brought out a record that I was sort of hoping he would bring out. If there's one record that I love to play all the time, it's Funeral March from here to Dameron.
Oh, that was
From the Electric Potted Ring. That was,
and my Harrington battery just went.
we got both parts.
Seriously?